Good afternoon. I'm Ebwin Febotu, and I'm a part of the ACE Emerging Professionals West Midlands Committee, currently serving as the chair. I'm also a civil engineer working in the Bridges and Structures team at ACOM in Birmingham. Right now, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to this ACE Emerging Professionals webinar organized by the West Midland Group. And today we will focus on net zero, and the ACE Emerging Professionals have created a webinar series to explore how the climate generation will not only lead our industry's response to society's net zero ambitions, but a generational response too. At the end, there will be time for a Q&A session, and I'll explain how you can send your questions through on the next slide. Before we proceed, I'd just like to give a couple of housekeeping rules. I'm sure everyone's aware of these, but it's a good idea to remind everyone. To let you know, this webinar is best experienced through headphones, and this would help to cut out background noise. To ask any questions, please go to the questions section in your control panel. This is the sidebar with the controls at the right-hand side of your screen. We will try our utmost best to answer as many questions as possible, but don't worry. If there are any questions that we don't get time to answer, we will cover these after the webinar. Additionally, if you miss anything in the webinar today, we will be uploading this to our website in the next few days, and you would have the opportunity to listen again if you want to. So to kick things off, we're going to have a poll. And throughout this webinar, we're actually going to have a few polls just to, get your ideas, get your thoughts about net zero and everything we'll be discussing today. So the first question I'm going to pose to you is, you should see on your screen now, and it says, when is the UK target date for achieving net zero emissions for greenhouse gases? The options we have are 2030, 2041, 2050, 2055. Just give you some time to answer that. And whilst you're answering the poll, if you're able to look in the chat as well, I believe Chetna's posted a question there. What is the first word that comes to mind when you hear the term net zero? There's no right or wrong answer. We just want to know your thoughts and how probably these answers will evolve throughout the webinar. Okay, nice to see some coming in, some answers. I see carbon. Okay, so looking at the results on the poll, which you can probably see as well, I can see most people have selected the right one. So 2050 is correct. If you selected 2041, I think that's understandable because the West Midlands, we did talk about 2041, and Ruth will be discussing this a bit later on. And if you didn't answer at all, this is perfect. You can get the opportunity to get some more knowledge about net zero and what that's all about. So moving on now, I would love to hand this over to Ruth Jeffs, Regional Director at Waterman Group. Over to you, Ruth.
Thank you, Ebony and Sarah. I'm delighted to join you and the emerging professionals during this lunchtime session to explore such an important topic. The ACE, alongside our sister company, EIC, has established a net zero task force. Today, I'd like to share with you the main findings from our work, together with some of the most promising solutions. The findings come from the member survey and workshops, which we have run, so they are much very much the views of engineering professional consultants. Thank you, Sarah, for moving on the slide. In front of you, you see that by sector, rail is the most prominent in terms of readiness for net zero. Interestingly, this is followed by buildings and waste. At the bottom are ports and airports, which is perhaps not so surprising. In the middle, we have energy, roads and water. Part of this is probably driven from the fact that rail is very mature at the moment, with HS2 coming on stream. Also, the thinking around buildings is very mature, particularly in terms of the work by the UK Green Buildings Council. There's more to be done though, as you can see, in terms of roads and water. The clarity on scenarios and pathways is improving. The Committee on Climate Change, the 6th Carbon Budget Report, is due out in December this year. Unfortunately, this has been delayed from September, obviously due to COVID reasons. That report will provide more clarity, and it will actually be the first report which will be committed into legislation following the commitment by the UK government to achieve net zero by 2050. So well done to everybody who got that right in the earlier poll. What I also add, of course, is for anybody joining us from Scotland, of course, they'll be looking to achieve net zero by 2045. The reason for that is Scotland's considered to be in a better position in terms of renewable energy in particular. So against the uncertainty, if you like, because it's not going to be until the end of the year that we get that foresight from the Committee on Climate Change in terms of thinking on net zero, it's perhaps not surprisingly then, when we've gone to our members and through the workshops, that the key factor that's in a barrier, if you like, to net zero is actually regulatory ease. So more surprisingly though, this was followed by technical feasibility and capacity to deliver, which is everybody who's on this webinar today. So again, we personally obviously have a lot of work to do. The net positives for net zero are the acceptability by not just society, but also our public sector and private sector clients. And also really encouragingly is the investor appetite. So again, there's still a lot of work to be done, but some of the granular issues surrounding net zero still remain. And it was interesting to see how many people cited carbon as a key element of net zero. And of course it is, and it's often used as a metric. But net zero is not just about net zero carbon, it's also about net water and net waste. In terms then of how projects are judged, most environmental impacts are judged against local limits in terms of noise, air quality, and highway capacity. The current planning system is based on this. As carbon is a global issue, there is currently no means of judging significance in environmental impact assessments of an individual project's carbon impact. There are also numerous disconnects at all stages of projects. Next slide, please, Sarah. So the ACE task force, alongside our sister company EIC, is potentially considering a number of solutions. And this work is really evolving in real time because we're finding out more and more and agreeing more as not just our industry, but globally what net zero actually means. There are loads of definitions of net zero and no confirmed agreed definition at the present moment. The Carbon Trust is putting forward a science target-based approach to net zero, which is looking likely to be adopted, but currently it doesn't exist in terms of the agreed way forward. So solutions then, in lack of having this guidance nationally, look at proposing a new overarching economic infrastructure national policy statement. Bit of a mouthful, but this intention is that this should integrate net zero with the government's wider expectations for infrastructure, thereby providing a mechanism to avoid those legal challenges we've seen historically on some of the major national projects, such as Heathrow Airport. Setting sector carbon budgets for each type of infrastructure could also be a way forward, but would that really work? That's a separate target for rail, for road, for waste, for water. But perhaps better suited would be a net zero compatibility statement for all projects to identify how the asset will fit into a 2050 net zero UK economy. That could work better. In addition, the use of an emerging construction innovation hub value toolkit is being considered. Now, this is something that we're looking at across the ACE with the Construction Innovation Hub over the forthcoming months. And this enables carbon metrics to be included, which could help us all push our clients further on achieving net zero. Also updating the IEMA guidelines for environmental impact assessment to produce EIA carbon chapters so that, again, individual projects can be properly considered within the globally rather than just locally. Also, of course, reviewing skill sets within consultancies, something all you emerging professionals, of course, are going to be interested in. Should carbon literacy be a fundamental aspect of a training? Should it be part of our core DNA as health and safety is today? Do we require deep specialists in different aspects of net zero? And should we have carbon specialists embedded in design and engineering teams, or should they be brought into projects later? There's still a lot of uncertainty, and there is a need for cultural embedding of action and targets, such that the commitments that the CEOs are making are mirrored throughout the hierarchy and at all points of influence. Some of our clients take this very seriously, whilst others are beginning their journey. Back to you, Sana.
Okay, so it's time for another poll. Zara, do you want to take it away?
Would you mind, Abunife, doing that? I do have the question now. So the first question on the poll number 2, apologies guys. How do emerging professionals feel about the sector's involvement, and is it a fair representation? It's regarding the slide number 2 that Ruth was talking about, and whether the results, were you surprised by them, expected them, or you just don't have an opinion about them? Okay. If there is an open-ended question as well. What factors do you think may be contributing to the previously mentioned results is our second question. And as previously, it's an open-ended, so just type your messages and we'll read out the most common one. In the meantime, we have a result for the first poll of the second poll. It was as expected. We're still waiting a couple of responses for the factors which may be contributing to the previously mentioned results. And we have one response so far: market forces and big businesses. We also got lack of knowledge about the topic, which very often is the case. Wait for one more response before we move on. Apathy, an attitude that you can't change things without disadvantaging oneself and those children. Very interesting answers. Very interesting answers. Now, Ruth, over to you once.
Yeah, they were interesting, Sarah. Personally, I was actually surprised at the lack of readiness in the water industry, but actually that looking back through some of the detail of the responses by fellow professionals, one of the things that stood out there was the tension between Ofwat and the Environment Agency. But actually, I think with the work that's gone on during COVID over the summer has actually helped ease those tensions. So it would be interesting as the work evolves to see if water is considered in a better state of readiness. So, but yes, thank you for your input, guys. Now, in the absence of a national net zero plan, the local authorities throughout the UK have been declaring climate emergencies and developing their net zero plans. And they're based on the powers and resources available to them. And the reason for that is, of course, is to, in answer to a lot of the direct action that's taken place over the last couple of years. Now, there are a few common frameworks that each authority is approaching in terms of looking at potential emissions across infrastructure such as buildings, transport, heat, power, and waste, and also considering, of course, the benefits of nature and particularly biodiversity. Towards this, in this January this year, the West Midlands Combined Authority published a climate action plan document for consultation. And it's this document that we're just giving a briefing on today and how that fits in with the national agenda. And Ebony and Sarah and I have been working on this webinar for about a month, actually, I would say. But what was interesting was just over 2 weeks ago, actually, Andy Street, the Mayor of the West Midlands, announced the appointment of WSP to actually prepare the first 5-year plan, because this document was a consultation document. And that 5-year plan has got to be ready by the end of this year. Now, what we can look to do, I'm sure the emerging professionals will look to perhaps do a follow-up in order to get some of that detail. There is a lot already available, though, through the consultation document and through the thinking of Andy. And at the end of the day, this first plan is just for the next 5 years. But actually, a lot of the infrastructure that we're working on day to day, be it roads, be it public transport, be it highways, has got a life of longer than 30 years. So it has a life during which net zero 2041 comes to fruition. So in order to meet the West Midlands target of net zero greenhouse gases by 2041, they've also established a couple of interim targets, a 30% reduction by 2022 and a 69% reduction by 2027. Now, the report, consultation report, details an investment programme of £40 billion, which sounds an awful lot of money, but actually that just translates to 1 or 2% of the regional GVA over that period. And that's over a 21-year period, of course. In association with the plan, there were 74 measures, and these are aimed at basically increasing greenhouse reduction each year from 3.8% to 13% each year to achieve the target. Now, this can be considered in line with the goals of the Paris Climate Accord, of course. The United Nations scientists have found that the world can still meet the goal to keep warming within the tolerable threshold of 2% degrees Celsius if people reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 7.6% each year. Now, obviously, we all have to start somewhere, so starting slightly lower than that figure is more realistic, and then achieving more towards the end of the programme makes perfect sense. However, even if we are successful in actually limiting temperature change to the 1.5 degrees, the real issues around climate change, flooding and extreme temperatures will still occur. So, moving on to the, oh no, sorry, if you can just remain on this slide, Sarah, sorry. So to address this commitment, the West Midlands 2041 measures are grouped into 5 themed actions. Changes to the economy. Now, the measures under this theme wide-ranging actually, because they really are looking to rebase how we go about business within the West Midlands. So it ranges from making sure, of course, we have clean air, career and skills, and at the heart of all this is energy efficiency. Most of us will have seen David Attenborough a few weeks ago when questioned, what is your one action that everybody should take? It was avoid waste, and that should be at the heart again of everything that we do. All that work then will lead to affordable housing, quality public spaces and assets, with upgraded transport networks, which again a lot of us professionals will be involved in delivering for the West Midlands, together with locking in those walking and cycling measures which have been put in place due to COVID. And also, of course, zero fossil fuel powered vehicles. Investing in resilience. This is key because, again, we need to be prepared to deal with the higher rainfall and the greater likelihood of extreme temperatures. That's going to happen, whatever route we take towards net zero. So for this, this theme is about enhancing biodiversity, targeted local food production, sustainable urban drainage systems, which my engineers know all about, of course, and a lot of you will get involved in day to day, flood alleviation schemes, of course, urban greening and microgeneration, leading to homes and communities which are actually built around nature-based solutions. Now, the West Midlands has been known for its car industry historically, and of course, recently, car production continues to be important within the region. So there's a recognition within the West Midlands 2041 plan of using our past to shape our future. So this is about looking at electronic vehicles, of course, but it's also about enhanced communications and also understanding renewables. People talk about carbon storage and also creating the next industrial generation. So it's doing that in a way that's acceptable. And it's not fully yet understood what's acceptable in terms of carbon offsetting, of course, and what's not. There is latest thinking is that there's going to be less offsetting. So it won't, it will unlikely to, in the future, to be able to just plant a forest in Brazil in order to get a plane to go on holiday. So there are some serious shifts coming along. In addition to that, it's meeting the climate challenge while still growing, of course. So this is about using low carbon processes wherever possible. It's also about recycling and repurposing materials, what I talked about earlier about waste, and new transport and infrastructure in neighbourhoods, which is shifting from transport fuel use away from petrol to electricity or gas, and also looking to eliminate the need for car ownership by mass transit and active travel wherever possible, which brings in other mechanisms in terms of renting of cars for the ad hoc trips rather than having it sitting outside of your residence. So lots of different things there. Decoupling prosperity from energy and resource use is really important, and Andy Street's obviously passionate about this because it comes back to the fairness for all. This is about inclusivity, prosperity and fairness, as it says on the front cover. And the reason to decouple it is that everybody then benefits. So it's not just those who have more resources available to them, that they can use those resources without thinking in a meaningful way. So that will lead to low carbon energy solutions, and there's work already going on in social housing to introduce, for example, air source heat pumps. So and that in turn helps fuel poverty, of course, as well. Again, the waste is very important, and also a slight emphasis is coming through in terms of investment. Some of our clients, for example, are asking what are the net zero credentials of that investment? Why should we put our money in there for the longer term? What benefits will it bring? And also, we're starting to see a difference in the procurement approaches. There's more emphasis in terms of having to meet net zero, of course. So thought's starting to be given to simple facts, it would seem to be simple, but important facts of things like construction vehicles being powered by electricity. It's not just the cars on the roads. So we really do all have a part to play in this, both through our work and our lives. The net zero challenge will actually, our perceived basic rights will be challenged through it. I saw a comment earlier about that, and absolutely spot on, whoever was raised that. There will be changes to how we travel, of course there will be, and the availability and choice of food in supermarkets. And as consultancy professionals, we have an active role in providing the solutions as well as a personal one. Next slide, please, Sarah. So this is an interesting thought from an article that I recently read, and it sums up the current situation for me quite perfectly. Like COVID-19, climate change is governed by feedback loops. Those feedback loops relate to carbon dioxide in the air, and they also relate to water vapor in the air. And if you get either of those two loops wrong, then exponential processes come into being, and we end up at the present moment, as we know, with ice caps melting at the moment, which is releasing water into the sea. That's fine as long as it stays within the cycle, within Earth. But if that combines with another process, which it upsets then the greenhouse gases, we actually end up in this process whereby the temperature and the climate gets out of those comfortable levels of the 2 degrees Celsius delay. Also, like COVID, every day of delay makes the consequences more catastrophic. Conversely, each action taken now will help avert even worse effects. Back to you, Sarah.
Thank you very much for that, Ruth. We will now run our third and final poll. So if I can have a question, please. What personal commitment can you dedicate to in order to contribute to net zero? So we're trying to find ways of daily activities that might contribute in a long term to the prevention and healing with the net zero. Wait for fewer responses. Please respond in the Zoom chat. Great, we've got some answers coming down. So we've got cycle to work, simple, healthy, good results. It's a win-win. Quite a few responses now. Reduce the use of plastic, absolutely. Designing efficiently, yes, every single one of us can contribute to that. Reduce the travel, absolutely. Working from home, sustainable transport, buying local produce, absolutely. It's got a lot of economical values doing so. Less use of car, yes, which contributes to transport and sharing rights. Less car dependence and lower food consumption. Go vegan from Dave Matthews. Obviously, plant-based diet is coming up twice now. Composting, eating less meat or none at all. Minimize travel, reduce food waste. So as you guys can see, it's literally, the question's been up for a minute and we've already got 6 different aspects of which everyone can implement on daily basis and doesn't require that much effort. So I really recommend to everyone to try and think of ways we can do it on daily basis. So we will now have the Q&A session now. So please to send your questions in the chat as well, and me and Abunife will read them out. I think we've got one dismissed here. Okay.
Okay, I've got one here. Ruth, I think this is for you. In your professional opinion, can we achieve net zero in the West Midlands by 2041?
Yes, I do believe we can. I do believe the technologies are available actually to do a lot of this. An awful lot of it is around energy efficiency. I just saw there somebody's talking about recycle energy from the gym. I think it's spot on. Why not? Why shouldn't our phones be recharged while we're cycling or on the treadmill? So it is an adaptation of that. There is a recognition that a lot of the technology is there. It's how we apply it, and it's how we make it affordable, of course. New technology can be very, very expensive. We all know from the latest iPhones how expensive they are when they first came up, and then they become more affordable. So I also consider that we actually have to make a start now. We all share the planet, we all share Earth, we all have an active role to play. And the good thing about having the net zero 2041 plan is that we can actually get ahead of the game, and why not in the West Midlands?
Thank you. Just to dig a little deeper into that, what would the sort of threats to achieving this goal be for us regionally?
In terms of achieving this regionally, it's the dichotomy, isn't it, of needing to grow. We have such a large ambition in terms of growth, driven by population. So what we need to do is actually rethink the expectations of what we do, and it might be simple little things. With Sarah and I are sitting at the moment here in the centre of Birmingham, of course. A lot of the offices at the present moment are empty. So with COVID-19, we've both travelled quite a long way into the office. Will that be the future? We may need to look at working slightly differently with workplace hubs located at strategic points, so that people can still come into the centre when they need to, but they also have other more localised work hubs dotted around the main major conurbations, because it's great at times working from home, but not always possible for everybody. So I think that's important, and we need to rethink really quickly the economy of the city centre. I think nationally as well, the issue of agriculture actually could do with some rethinking. National policy, if you like. Agriculture isn't really thought of as part of GVA, if you like, but actually it's going to have a huge part to play one way or the other in terms of local produce. So we need to find a way to value that, and that change in how we value things has to be driven from government and from Treasury, and happen very, very quickly to make West Midlands 2041 net zero work.
Thank you for that, Ruth. We've got a question. Next one. How do we as individuals best upskill on carbon literacy? What are potential the first steps?
The potential for the first steps are to do some of your own research, read what's available, guys. There's an awful lot out there, it has to be said, but some key things to look out for is the 6th carbon budget report that's due out December. Hopefully it will make it for December. That's worth watching, because that, as I say, is going to be the first. It sets the budget actually for 2033 to 2037, but it is the first budget that is actually a commitment set in law, if you like, following the target of 2050. And hopefully around that time as well, the definition of net zero will start to come together. At the moment, as I said, it's pretty unconnected. The feeling is that it's more likely to be around a science-based target, which makes sense, but that's not agreed yet. So that's the key thing to look for. The other thing I would say is that carbon gets used a lot as the currency of net zero, but it's much more than just carbon. It's the other aspects as well. Yes, net zero carbon, but also, as talked about earlier, net zero waste and net zero water are also important aspects.
Which leads us nicely to the next question that we have. You mentioned at the start that net zero is not just about carbon, but also water and waste reduction. Is there maybe a case for identifying pollution reduction as a separate topic, or is it covered under the heading of waste?
Right, okay, yeah. Waste tends to be thought about in terms of recyclable materials, landfill, for example. From that perspective, clean air, we have to have clean air as human beings. We require clean air to be a healthy society. But at times you can get pollution, air pollution, of course, through the waste process. So again, there's a push and pull in terms of those aspects. So that's an interesting question, actually, and how we think about that. We need to again think more, I think, about air pollution through the EIA process. Again, talked about carbon earlier coming out from the work of the ACE and EIC, but actually air pollution, you could say, falls into that remit. It's not just the localized aspect, but it's also that overall global aspect. So that's a good point, actually.
Thank you. We've got another question. Do you think COVID has accelerated our ambitions to achieve net zero?
And I think COVID has provided us with the ability to understand potentially the pressing urgency to reach net zero. I think it also has potentially helped us to understand, as engineers, we understand scientific data, but I think having the whole of society understand scientific data has been pretty tricky historically from the climate change aspect. And actually, I think COVID-19 helps potentially get those messages across in a much more understandable way. So it's got some real benefits. And we all saw the benefits during the lockdown in terms of levels of air pollution and ease of what moving around we could do locally. So yes, we should be able to see some of the positives as well. Always a positive on a negative.
Always look for the positives in everything, Ruth. I completely agree with that. We've got one more question, carbon related. People feel their need to sacrifice their finance and convenience to reduce carbon footprint. How can we make people understand and convince them to support the net zero?
Okay, net zero doesn't always have to cost more money to play your part. I, for one, from a personal point of view, are with a renewable electricity supplier. So, and I know from discussion that Sava's with the same supplier.
Go Octopus.
And actually, in terms of what's available on the market, they're very effective. And this is one of the reasons why we have to rethink how we value things. And talked before about the Construction Innovation Hub value toolkit. That starts to look at how we value things from a project and investment perspective, because it just doesn't take the normal benefits and disbenefits of a project, but starts to value things in terms of humanity and society. And that's going to be the real step change. And that's going to be what every emerging professional gets to be part of, developing that and revaluing things. So that revalue is going to be really important.
Okay, thank you. I've got one more on this side. How does the West Midlands measure up in comparison with other regions in achieving their targets? I know you mentioned Scotland a bit earlier about them being a bit better than us, but how does the Midlands sort of measure with London, the Northeast, anywhere else really?
Well, the wonderful thing at the moment is the West Midlands can say they're the best because there's nothing comparable at the moment. There's no base to compare things on. In terms of a lot of local authorities are developing their net zero plans. So the West Midlands isn't alone in that. In terms of Scotland, the reason Scotland can is perceived to be able to achieve it sooner by 2045. The reason for that is because of the availability of renewable energy. So it's more to do with circumstance than actual hard plans they've already got in place. It's already existing technology and existing factors that are already there. In terms of importance, you can see how important it is to the West Midlands, because the combined authority has not just waited for the pandemic to end. They did the discussion at the beginning, which finished in March, and then they've spent the time over the summer thinking about how to take it forward. And they've got in place now the consultants to actually deliver that the further detail of the first 5-year plan. But the amount of information that was shared is enough for us all to start the action now. So I think we're in a very, very good position to actually become leaders and influence actually how other areas develop in the future.
Thank you. That's great to hear. That's all the questions on my side. Sarah, have you got any left?
No, that's all on my side as well. Great.
Thank you. I just want to say thank you to Ashley for the useful links you put in the chat. Everyone check that out if you can. Generally, I just want to say many thanks to everyone who's come out tonight, this afternoon, I should say. Thanks for listening. I hope you found it interesting, something to take away, something to think about. I hope you've learned something as well. Maybe your perception on net zero from the start of the webinar might have changed, might have expanded a bit. I want to say thank you also to Ruth, to Sarah, to Chetna as well. And yeah, just to remind you also that the whole webinar is recorded, and a link will be sent to you a bit later so that you can refer back to it. You can send it to a friend, to a colleague, and you can just listen to it again much later. The slides will also be on the ACE website for your references. Just to also let you know that the wider sort of ACE Emerging Professionals group have 2 more webinars coming up. So visit the ACE website for more information if you are interested in any of these. See you next time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a lovely day.